Creative Journeys is your go-to podcast for all things creativity. I'm your co-host, Dave Petrosky, chair of the Communication, Media, and Screen Studies Department.
And I am your co-host, Melanie, Venezuelan designer and educator. This is the podcast about creativity, what it is in its many forms, and how we can become more creative in our everyday lives.
All right, welcome back to Creative Journeys. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, Dave. How's everyone doing?
We're doing pretty well, I think, right?
Yeah. We're doing well.
Okay. Our guest today is Dr. Casey Councilor. Is actually a colleague of mine in the Communication, Media, and Screen Studies Department here at Southern Connecticut State University. Got to get the whole plug in there.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. But I'm really excited to talk to Casey. We talk quite a bit. Just because we see each other all the time and that kind of stuff. But, one of the things that I don't get to share often enough is the fact that Casey has always made a great impression on me from the moment that he interviewed on our campus, right? So just to give a little bit of background from my perspective, like Casey is somebody that is doing his creative work is focused on comics and drawing and getting students comfortable with drawing and expressing themselves through comics. And the very first time that I encountered Casey was in the job interview, and the classroom demonstration that he did was just one of the best things that I ever experienced in an interview, or, even as an instructor going in to observe another class, because, it began with, just doing some drawings and getting comfortable. And then he basically modified his particular presentation to fit exactly the topic that was being talked about in class that day. And it was just so enlightening in so many different ways. And it got the students thinking about it. And knowing that particular class, it wasn't my class, because my classes are always interactive. They were reticent to talk. They were just a very, quiet bunch. But that particular class, they were very active. And part of it was because of the activity. So that's a long way around introducing Casey. But I'm so happy to have you here to talk about things.
Well, thank you. You also brought back that job interview anxiety. And I had forgotten that we had adapted it to the actual topic of the class. But it was scary to come to a new state, to a new school, interviewing for a job, very high stakes. And then have people, especially faculty, are the hardest ones to get to draw.
Yeah.
Compared to students, but it worked out. So thank you.
It was great. It was great.
Well, I am so excited to talk to you, Casey, and get to know you, because we haven't really interacted much in the 5 years that I've been here. But I know of the work that you do in communication disorders with students and the SIF shop with Sarah De Luca. Yeah. And she speaks so highly of you. And I hear a lot of stories. So I'm very excited to get to know you and hear about your work and your comics.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe could you just talk about your approach to things and because I think a lot of folks have like predispositions about what comics are and what they do and that kind of stuff. And I think that it's well, I'll let you speak because you do a much better job of articulating it than I do. So,
well, and then Melanie, I'm very interested in talking to you because you are in the, officially in the art realm, and comics have a kind of an interesting relationship to the.
Oh, I have a lot of students that want to go into comics.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. So I didn't come to comics or didn't think of myself as an artist until I was 35, and I was. Had just finished my coursework in rhetoric and communication at UW-Madison. And I was at this point where I was often sitting in these small seminar rooms, with maybe 10 people talking really in depth about some very specific rhetorical context. And to be fair, I do, rhetoric is really important, especially in these moments, to be able to analyze public discourse and the way that language shapes our world. But at that particular moment, PhD programs have a way of sometimes draining the life out of you. And I was feeling that. And I was, at this point where I was like, I really want to feel like everything I'm doing is relevant to a lot of people. And I don't know, is sitting alone writing a dissertation for years, does that feel right to me in this particular moment in 2015 or so? And at that point, I had met through a friend who was a visiting artist at the time, Lynda Barry. And it was through, I took her class. I took one class with her and then another, and I think 5 or 6 altogether. But that's the reason I stayed in school. That was the reason I finished my dissertation. And I became a cartoonist through her. And she's got a very particular way of working, which is like completely by hand. And often, she comes through sort of like the underground comics scene. So yeah, no computers. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of really kind of experimental stuff. She never taught any of us how to actually draw. She just made us do it a lot and kind of figure out our own way. And what that really meant was that everyone in her classes develops a very unique style. So even the students who come in with a very strong style, she does a lot of things to kind of loosen that up to help students. Or if they're drawing in a very, they're always drawing in an anime style or always in a particular way, just, expanding what they're drawing.
Which can be a little bit difficult sometimes.
The art students often had a harder time because they were proficient, practitioners. But then by the time, they were done, their work was much more interesting. It was more rich. They didn't feel sort of pigeonholed. So yeah, that was a transformative and continues to be transformative experience.
It's interesting that you brought up that Lynda didn't have specific instructions about how to draw.
Nope.
And that was one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I sat in on the teaching demo and actually was observing your classes and things, was that you were coaching drawing. A bit to just get them, and breaking down that barrier.
I have a 60-second cartooning lesson because no stick figures. That's a hard and fast rule.
That's probably where I would start too.
That's where everyone will start. So I give people a way to start that's the same way that Lynda gave me. And there are a bunch of us who sort of teach in her tradition and in that kind of way. And a lot of it, in some ways, and I got this from her too, the drawing isn't the drawing is a result of, moving your pen on a piece of paper. It's a record of time, but it's really more about storytelling. It's about expression. We're often trying in my classes to get to a place where we are writing and drawing things that we didn't think we knew, or we're trying to remember things that we couldn't. And so trying to surprise ourselves, blow your mind with your own mind, as opposed to doing what you already know how to do.
And I love the storytelling part of it because it also, drawing things that you didn't know you could, remembering things is also a great way to remember stuff. I remember in grad school when I was getting my MFA, very first semester. So this was very impressive to me. An art history professor, he took us into a classroom, turned all the lights off. He moved furniture and he said, "This is a cave. You're now in a cave and you're going to think back to, when we're looking at drawings on walls and hieroglyphics and things like that. And I'm going to put some stuff in the whiteboard and you're going to have to figure out your way over there. And when you get there, I'm going to turn the lights on for just a few seconds and you're going to just see what you find, remember it, and then you're going to draw it." And then eventually we had another whiteboard where we all just kind of saw our things in the darkness and then went to the other side of the room to draw it. And it was so interesting how all of us perceive things differently.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
remember different things, even though we were looking at the same exact
You know,
figures.
we did something very similar where we would go, we would be in the art room. We would look at an image for a minute, then we would leave and then draw it and then look at it. Or we would look at the image and then come out and tell somebody about it and have them draw it. But a lot of this is like really practicing noticing and what are we paying attention to. That's really sort of, I think, core to human being. And I think it's so important right now when people's attention is so fractured.
Yeah, I think that the other thing that this kind of gets at, and also the fact that you were talking about not using computers and that kind of stuff, there's an embodied sense of that connection to memory that I think is really sort of profound. It has a very different connection when you're trying to draw something about a memory or sort of just get that out there. And it's very different from having to write it, right? Because I find that's very disconnected from what the feelings are and that sort of thing. And you get more of a truer expression of what it sometimes the emotion, but also, some of the details that you would probably miss if you were like writing it out in sentence form or something like that. And I think that's a really cool thing about it is that, just that idea of trying to get used to your body's memory and trying to, because you don't have to be somebody that's like a brilliant artist to be able to kind of give a notion. I mean, even if we're talking about like cave paintings and petroglyphs and that kind of stuff, I mean, those were not what we would call fine artists or anything like that, right? But they were expressive of a moment and something that was really important. And, I think that that's something that we kind of lose in the context of computers, right? It has a different sense of what we're doing. And that's, part of what I try to do in my communication design class is try to break down that idea that we have to jump on the computer right away to do something. Let's do some thumbnail sketches first. Let's kind of figure out like what it is that we're trying to represent or whatever before we get on the computer. I think that this makes people a little bit more mindful about what's going on up here. But through your body.
Yes, and I would say even when we move to the computer, just doing the different iterations and finding different colors, or maybe moving the line this way or the letter in another way, I think it's important for people to remember that we don't arrive at a final solution immediately. We have to try different things, and I feel like this leads me to my question, because you did just say that you found comics at 35. And obviously I had no idea about that. And we talk about in this podcast how, a lot of us have found sort of like our current occupations, our current careers later in life and not necessarily in college, and how we encourage students to keep learning and keep trying new things, that this is not the moment to have everything figured out.
Right.
And I love that you just shared that about you. But I do, in the beautiful fact sheet that Dave put together, I do see that you focus a lot on medical drawings and drawings to assist in health and public talks and journals. So how do you move into that way? Because you discovered drawing at 35, and then you somehow go into a very sort of like niche area, I would say, of medical illustrations.
Yes, basically. Well, so I wouldn't say medical illustration because that is a highly technical field. But one thing that I learned, so in Lynda's classes, we would have to produce, depending on the class, 1 to 3 pages of comics a week, which is quite a lot in addition to everything else that we were doing. And so I didn't really enjoy doing fiction comics, so I wanted to do real life stuff. Which meant that I had to have that much material to write and draw about every week. And one of the things at the same time, it's really like two sides of a coin for me, was that when I was in her classes and forced to, I'm going to get to the medicine part in a second. This is the path. This is the path.
You take the path.
Okay, this is the path. So in her, like when you're drawing, especially if you're writing and drawing autobiographical stuff, you'd have to draw yourself a lot. You know, in comics, you're repeating characters all the time. So, and we would also start every class with a self-portrait. And so it was sort of, after a couple semesters, this is something I had been thinking about for a decade, but realized that I was trans and wanted to transition. And it was so helpful for me. I mean, one, it was through comics that I really like sort of got to that. It would have probably taken me a lot longer and a lot more suffering. But then once I had that, instead of trying to avoid all of the really difficult and painful stuff that comes with that, doctor's office visits, insurance stuff, things that happen on the street or in class, or there's just a lot. That became material for me. So then I was, able to, something shitty happens, then I can draw about it. I can write about it. And then, but one area, even throughout that, it never occurred to me that stuff that I'm also I'm both a hypochondriac and I hate the doctor. It's a terrible combination. So anyway, fraught space. But it never once had occurred to me that what happens in a doctor's office that I could write or draw about that. Until Lynda introduced us to a woman named M.K. Serwick, who goes by the name Comic Nurse. She was an RN and is now, she was one of the founders of this relatively new 15 or so year old field called graphic medicine, which is a transnational, international collective of people who use comics in and around healthcare. So this is comics by doctors, by nurses, patients, caregivers, anyone sort of around the space of healthcare or caregiving. So my route to that was doing comics around, gender, embodiment, trans healthcare, and then also in the field of public health. And graphic medicine, which pulls from all different fields. So, all of the medical fields, there's sort of offshoots in that field. So there's a book called Graphic Public Health about using comics, obviously for communicating out public health stuff, but also for research. I'm working on an edited book that's graphic rhetoric of health and medicine. So it's sort of health humanities, but with comics. So, and a lot of graphic medicine really goes back to Lynda. She worked with a lot of those doctors and nurses who are, obviously highly skilled practitioners, but not artists. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them have just taken things in really interesting directions. So that's sort of my path. It was always sort of this black box of what happens at the doctor, and then really empowering once I figured out I could do that. And then, so some of it is first person narratives, but then beyond that, just looking at, I did a co-authored piece that would never come out now, not sponsored by, but in a special supplement of a journal that was Social Science and Medicine, put out by the NIH, that would never come out now. So I'm glad that we got that out with a friend who is a biomedical scientist, but also now a social worker therapist. And we put that out as part of a larger collection, which was a big deal to finally get comics in that sanctioned, very fancy medical space.
Yeah. But I just love the story so much because it also, when we're trying to find ourselves, is our voice that we need to put out there in different mediums.
Right.
And, students don't necessarily think like, I can change the world with comics.
Right.
I can make a change with a logo or with a game. And just empowering students to do that and just find their voice and put it out there. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I do think it pulls from the same place. I mean, comics is the language that feels most fluent to me, but for someone else it would be, graphic design, games, pottery. You don't necessarily know what that is, but it is, it's sort of, that's the channel through which that sort of, I don't know what you would call it, essence or humanity stories come out.
Yeah, I this is so intriguing to me because I think that it's such a really interesting way to kind of frame what the experience of doing comics is, because the way that you talked about it just now just really captures that idea of discovery through the medium, right? And I think that's it's just such a very cool thing to kind of connect with, and I wish more people would experiment with it, and not necessarily do it because I mean we can't have everybody be a cartoonist, but
Or could we?
But you never know
but-
when there's going to be a cartoonist in the room if they never experimented with it.
sure,
Right.
absolutely, that's right.
Or even, I just finished watching the 3rd season of The Bear, and I think about cooking in the same way. It's like you can't wear it out,
Yeah.
And you can, you can just like microwave something, or it could be a really nurturing art form that sustains us.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm the
that's right.
microwave person. My husband is the one that uses it as an art form.
As long as there's one. Yeah.
You've brought some examples. Yeah.
I did. So this is where I might like people who are, especially people who teach. I'm very clear that I'm not a drawing teacher, and that comics are not fine arts. So with that caveat, like I really like to think about drawing as a basic form of human expression, rather than like the point is to make a perfect looking picture. Because again, we have cameras, we have AI, and I think that can be really disempowering because students are like, why would I draw when I can just like Google something? Or when I can have AI make something for me? Why would I participate in that? And that to me is what's so sad. So we, I feel like any sort of way we can build in an opportunity for students to create something is a good thing to do. So this is something that I got from Lynda initially and then adapted it a little bit. But I start all of my classes. I only teach one class that's making comics. But at all of my classes, we start with a 2 or 3 minute self-portrait, which I like as an opening ritual. But it also does give, and I can do it maybe related to the theme of the class sometimes, though not always. And, it's a way for us to continually work on students who think that they suck at everything. Or like, oh my God, Melanie, your picture's so cute. Mine's so awful. Look at this, and then we can talk about like, okay, well, how can we sort of work on that voice that keeps telling you mean stuff? Because again, it's a basic form of human expression. I have a 2.5-year-old, and boy, does she not worry if her picture's good or bad. Like she just draws.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, that's why we do it, because I like to help people reclaim this basic form, just like speaking or dance or things like that, we should all do it.
Yeah, and again, it's not about being like the other person or drawing the same way the person next to you does, but finding
Right.
your style and figuring out
Exactly.
what your drawing is going to look like and what's going to make yours stand out.
Right.
Right, and what's your voice, right? Like, and that's the big difference between actually drawing it and getting it off of a computer or a Google search. Is like, where is the you in this?
Right.
Like, this gives you ownership of your ideas and your expression, and it makes that connection to who you are as a person, as opposed to sort of an antiseptic, like here's this graphic that's out there in the world that may or may not have been created by a human being.
Right. And that, I do think that, not all students can get there, but there are a lot of like sort of lessons that we can build in. And there are a couple of things that I find really help. One is playing music in the background that can kind of help quiet when people, they have that panic look and then the song is on, they're like, okay. And it just helps. And then, I do have a rule that students have a hard time with, that there's no such thing as a bad drawing. And I want them to draw the whole time. At the beginning, that's kind of harder for them. But then towards the end, they are drawing for a full 2 or 3 minutes. And I give them a theme. So if I were to just say draw a self-portrait, that would be difficult. And the themes are often, they might be topical, but they're also often ridiculous. For example, before spring break, I had them draw themselves as the statue in the middle of a fountain.
Okay.
And the water was coming out of some part of them. So, there's a lot of, and this woman was like, oh no, I put the foot on backwards. And it just happens sometimes. Like so these are not students who draw otherwise, or who haven't drawn before. Yesterday, coming back from spring break, I had them draw themselves emerging from a portal. And they're very expressive, but they also, they allow students to participate
That's a great one.
in these nonverbal ways. So from the very beginning of class, here's a good one. It's coming from this guy. All the students, are participating, even if they're not going to speak in class. They've already made something. So then it becomes a little less daunting, I think, to participate in class. And it just, I'm still uncomfortable when I draw. But it makes the room feel alive.
I'm uncomfortable when I draw.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I'm a designer. And people expect me to do sketches all the time.
Right. And it's
Right,
what it
right.
is that, like being uncomfortable is like aliveness, I think.
Yeah.
And I encourage myself and others to just feel okay being uncomfortable in that way.
Yeah. And it's such a non sequitur. Well, maybe it's not. I just watched the season finale of Harley Quinn, the animated series. I don't know if you
Okay.
guys watch it.
I know what it is. I have not seen it.
It's on Max, and I'm not plugging the show at all. But the whole thing, the episode was called the point is the mess. And like this whole big thing, like Brainiac is like a super villain. And he has like this epiphany that, it's not, he's always trying to like control the world, and he's trying to capture like Metropolis and put it in a glass dome or whatever. But then she convinces him that, actually it's her mother convinces him that it's about the mess, and that the mess is the point, is basically what he keeps saying over and over and over again. And that's exactly sort of that feeling that you're, talking about in that sort of creative moment, that it's not the point of coming up with the perfect thing. It's the point of like embracing that messiness. And that's how you discover things. Like that's the creative risk. Right. And that's it captures that moment perfectly.
Yeah. And I'm seeing it a little bit as therapeutic as well.
Sure.
And just having those 2-3 minutes, that moment in your class when the
Right.
student can just might be like, you know what, I'm going to let my feelings on this piece of paper right now, because the
Yes.
topic that professor gave it, it's perfect for that.
I do, as a professor, at one point when I was doing this in Wisconsin, I was lecturing a 120 person class
wow.
twice a week, and I had them do it, which meant, and I collect them at the end of the class, and I give them all back at the end of the semester, so they can also see how, I just drew 2 minutes a couple times a week, but wow, my drawing really got better, just with that, which I think is a lesson we can pull, because a lot of times we think, I have to go to an intensive, 12-hour a day thing in order to learn some skill. It's like all in. It's like, no, actually small effort over time.
Yeah. Well,
does
it's
lead to
the
results.
practice of it.
Right.
And I tell students all the time, I was just doing an advising session yesterday, and I noticed that the student didn't have any graphic design classes next semester. I'm like, okay, this can't happen. We need to change this. You need to have one design class, because you are going to forget. From May to January, you are going to forget how to use the software. and some of the skills that you learn.
Yeah.
And you need to have that daily interaction with the software and the practices, because that's how you get better with those little bits of time that you do every day, not because you had a 2-hour intensive class.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And well, and that's the thing that I've found repetitively is that you can't talk about it as practice. Right. Because as soon as you say practice, the students don't want to do it.
Sure.
Right. So now I've started to talk about like, ooh, ow, just hit the arm with the microphone there. I would just have an exercise that, instead of calling it practice, I call it a hands-on exercise. Right. And, I give them a context and they have to do that. And it kind of shifts the frame a little bit so that they're not thinking about it that way. But I think that's very true that those small increments lead to a lot. There's great dividends behind that. And I think that that's something that I've tried, or I'm still trying to figure out, like, how can I capitalize on that in classes and get the students to become aware of that, right? And I think, the issue, of course, as instructors, is that, when we're talking about like doing it at the end of the semester and that kind of stuff, at that point, it's at the conclusion. And do we have time to kind of talk that through with them and say, oh, hey, did you notice something happened here? And then they kind of miss it if we, if we don't get the chance to. So how do you encapsulate that so that we can give that sort of support, or say, hey, look, you are making progress. You are doing this great stuff, or you're making huge strides, if not in terms of your skill level, but in terms of your awareness. And trying to as an instructor, trying to figure out like how to make that happen is quite difficult.
Right. And I remember I struggled a lot in terms of maintaining a practice because I was with Lynda for so long. And, she's somebody who I looked up to, who I do look up to so much. And somebody I didn't want to disappoint. So I never didn't do my homework. I used to be a chronically late person. I was never late to her class. And it's like having a personal trainer where it's like, well, I don't have to think about my workout. I'm just going to do exactly what she told me to do. But when you're in that, it's like being in the military or something where you have like this externalized structure, just like our students have with us. And then when you leave that, I think for a lot of people, myself included, it was really difficult to, I went through a time where I wasn't doing anything, and then I just had all the guilt of like not doing what I thought I should be doing, and then I'd have periods where I'd do a lot and then none. And then I do think teaching is sort of helpful, but it's just been a long journey for me to figure out how do I maintain my own practice while being so busy, while having all this other stuff. And I'm still figuring out how to do that. I'm in a rhythm now where I'm doing, I'm sharing comics with people monthly towards my next project, and the sharing piece I think is really important as both accountability, but I think art is meant to be shared.
Yeah.
And so if you're just doing stuff alone and not showing anybody, then I think it's hard to maintain a practice because it is an exchange, I think.
Yes.
So I'm glad you're doing that with your students, because the more you can like instill that practice before they leave, the less they'll suffer.
Well, they're probably going to suffer anyways because we're in such an evolving field.
Yes.
And everything changes on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Well, how do you, as someone who's teaching something that is, is it fair to say largely computer based?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with AI when people are like, oh, I'll just use Canva?
Well, even Canva, I wouldn't consider Canva AI.
Sure.
I would just consider it another tool. I think there's pros and cons to everything, and I always compare it to like when web came out and everyone was so scared of web and print is gonna die. So now AI is out and designers are gonna be out of jobs and everyone is just gonna be hiring or paying for ChatGPT premium and things like that. And yes, some people do, some businesses do. But if you really are focused on creating a great product, you need the human perspective in there. So I teach the students, you can use AI in certain projects, or I give them prompts where they're allowed to use it.
Right.
And maybe it's just for brainstorming. So maybe you're blocked because I asked you to do 50 logos of one animal.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, God.
I've done that. So, at some point they can make maybe like 15 or 20 different variations and then they get stuck. Okay, so how can I maybe get another idea? Okay, let's ask ChatGPT for some ideas and maybe it will spit out 15 options and maybe 5 of those are some things that you can try. Or you have this sort of like idea in your brain and you want to create a mood board because you want to present something to a client. Well, with Midjourney, and even now with ChatGPT, you can create images that I believe are coming from DALL-E or Leonardo, I think is another good one. And they can put their mood boards together and say like, okay, this is sort of like the vibe that we want to go with. But we have to do a photo shoot and we have to do this logo and we have to try different things. So I think it's a great way to use for inspiration. It's never going to be used for final product because it's imperfect.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I had a student in my interactive design class, which I teach in the springs, and they make an app. So I let them choose whatever topic they want to do as long as it's something that is going to make the world a better place. So the student decided to make a rescue app. So she created this fictitious rescue where they had dogs and cats, and she made the whole app for it and the website. And her husband had a premium account to Midjourney, so she wanted to play with it. And I said, perfect. You can make all of the images that you're going to put in this app on Midjourney because my class is not about you making images. It's about you understanding what prototyping is, how to do interaction elements, how to put an app together. So she started making all of the images, and the more detail she got on her prompts, the more mistakes there were in those images. So if she requested a person that had a shirt with cats in it and asked little bits of prompts, it will give her the weirdest cats ever. And maybe the cat has 6 legs. And in the fingers, they had 10 fingers. And to the naked eye, maybe you wouldn't see it. But once you zoomed into the picture, that's when you started seeing all those imperfections. And things like that, they just cannot go out into a product label or a TV advertisement, right? So I think it's good to take advantage of the little things. I do think some of the tools that AI has brought about into Photoshop and Illustrator too, how you can switch your color palettes really fast, they speed up the workflow.
Right.
And that is something that we do need to learn how to use. Like, how are we going to speed up our workflow on admin-related tasks so we can have more tasks to present a client a better concept? So why am I going to spend 2 days removing a background from a photo when I can use AI and have Photoshop remove it for me in seconds, and then I just have to maybe spend 2 hours cleaning up the rest, right? So things like that is what I encourage the students to try and to do. But you'd be surprised that they're scared. They're not as active and interested in using AI in my classes I would have thought about.
Well, I think it's the transition with the technology in general, right? I mean, I remember when Wikipedia first came out. I mean, there was a big uproar from academics and from teachers. Oh, the students shouldn't use this, blah, blah, blah. Didn't have a problem with them using any regular encyclopedia. But then, this is on the internet, so therefore it's not good. But the whole point was that the students had like drilled into them that this was something that they were not supposed to do. And breaking that sort of reinforced narrative that says this is not what's possible or what's not possible, made it so that they couldn't, they wouldn't touch it, or they wouldn't, it became too much work to overcome that sort of mental barrier that said I shouldn't do this, rather than think about what I could use it for or what I should use it for. And I think that that's where we're at with AI, is that, folks understand the potential of it, but because of whatever preconceived notions that they have, or whatever sort of blocks that they have in the way, it's making it's basically stifling their imagination for making it work in a productive way.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm married to a photographer, and they have AI editing tools like you're talking about that really, they're imperfect, but they can, when they are working well, really, give her more time to spend with clients or out on shoots, and then less time, doing the micro edit kind of stuff, or image to image. So that I think is so helpful. I get really sad when I hear about students in creative writing classes and script writing classes that are just submitting completely AI work.
And that is definitely problematic. And sometimes I wish our colleagues would trust that we're not encouraging students to do that. That the ones that teach AI in classes, like myself, are doing it in a way that is ethical, and teaching them the good and the bad, what they should do and not do. Because just like we don't want students to plagiarize or copyright images, we don't want them to not submit their own work. And to steal some robot piece that was put together. Like, you do need to have your creative thinking mind on and put your ideas on a page.
Right. And I think, when students do that, part of it is because they don't have confidence in their own work, and they're like, well, AI can do something better, or they're stretched on time. But then what they miss out on is really like the whole point, which is the process, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And or when, there are a lot of shortcuts people use, many of our colleagues too, using AI for writing different kind of proposals and things like that. And some of that is more admin related, which I think is different. But I'm the kind of person who really does, I don't know, it's not like I have fully formed thoughts and then I just put them down in writing, like I figure out what it is I'm thinking through the process of writing. So if we shortcut that process in whatever form, or even like the struggle, that's, again, not everything, not the more admin kind of stuff or the rote kind of tasks, but the struggle that I think is part, or should be part of, the creative process, where you're like, any good piece, I feel like you have to be stuck and have no idea how to get out, and then you figure your way out. And I don't want to shortcut that experience.
And writing is intimidating.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I also can't put all my thoughts down. Like, I start with bullet points, so I have Post-its, and then it's like, okay, here are my thoughts. How am I going to put this together in a paragraph or in a page or in 2 pages, and so on. And something that I learned in graduate school doing my doctorate was a shitty draft.
Oh, yeah.
How to make a shitty draft. I'm a designer, so I don't write much.
Yeah.
But in my doctorate studies, I am writing a lot. But just learning what a shitty draft is, something I had never heard in my life before, and applying that now when I start my writing has changed everything.
Isn't it so helpful? And then you're like, actually, this isn't so shitty at all.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what we do a lot of work on in composition notebooks. I just cut down file folders for students to do comics on, because I want them to know that these are shitty drafts. I'm not going to give you like super fancy materials and then you're going to freak out. Like, I want us to get used to making, and then we'll work our way up to nicer stuff. But you'll find that, we also don't use pencils. We go straight to pen, because I want them to, when students do have pencils, they spend the whole time erasing, and we don't actually get something out, so that permission to do shitty first drafts, some of it I say explicitly, some of it is just implicit in that, I got this notebook that you have for 92 cents at Walmart. Okay. And you can get another one for 92 cents. So you don't have to worry about wasting pages. You don't have to rip pages out if you don't like something. Just, keep going.
Yeah. Like you're giving them note cards. And what's the other pile of things
Oh
that you
yeah,
have
yeah,
next
yeah.
to you.
This was a student, and the other thing too is that one thing I find in comics is that it's really about the writing and it's about the story. You can have beautiful artwork, but if the story is not good, the comic is not compelling. But these are just one-page mini zines. We're actually going to do this in my class this afternoon. This was a student's final project, and what he did, and he got a job at a therapeutic boarding school, and he's going to be doing comics work with the students there.
Amazing.
When he graduates this spring. So he took this, the apartment he grew up in, and every room has one of these little mini zines. And these are just a single piece of paper, no staples. So they're easily, classic, as you know. So easily photocopied and then refolded and cut. You don't even need scissors. You could just tear the paper. But each room, and there's a letter to future tenants, but there's a map that he had throughout as a way of telling stories about the place where he grew up.
Wow.
And it's just, the way that I teach the comics classes, I really think about it like recipes, like I'm giving you a lot of different, every class period is different. So, some people are going to love this form. Some people are not. Some people are going to love writing in the first person. Some people are going to love writing in the second person. Some people like fiction. Some will like nonfiction. Some will enjoy this type of pen. Others will enjoy others. So the idea is we're going to do a lot of different things, and you're going to sort of find the recipes that you like and be okay with the fact that some of the recipes you're not going to like. And then this is another, my office is full of artwork, but this was from, I think, my first semester here. And I think I had students as a daily practice just draw a monster every day. Okay. And this one from this student whose class name was H2O. They also take character names in class. This sits right across from me. Like I sit at my desk and I look at the wall and this is what I see. This is like the kind of drawing that kids do. And a lot of times adults will sort of recreate a monster that they have seen before, but this has like sort of the wildness of a kid's drawing. But it came from somebody who was, I think, 25, and it's just delightful. I don't know anything about it. I don't know why there's a bus going into the side of this creature. I don't know why they're different. I don't know anything about it, but I know that it brings me great joy and delight. And really what I'm trying to do is get students to the place where they're able to draw as freely as a kid can draw.
Yeah.
But it just, I've been staring at this since approximately December of 2018. Yeah.
I hate to say this, but we're out of time. I know. There's so much more to talk about. We have to have you come back again because there's so much more that I wanted to get to. We got time limits.
I know, but I
so.
I do think coincidentally we ended in a great note.
Absolutely.
That is just let's create something that brings people joy.
Right.
It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if there's a bus behind a monster. Let's just do something where you're relaxing for 2-3 minutes and you're creating something that somebody else is going to find beautiful.
And I used to worry when I was first drawing like that if I drew my friends in a story, I'd be like, oh, she's not going to like how she looks in this. That has never once happened. Like people are honored to be drawn or included in a story. I still sometimes am nervous about it, but my students find the same thing. They'll do a drawing and then they'll give it to somebody, and they'll find that it does bring delight to somebody else.
It does.
And in fact, the more unique and quote unquote shitty it might be, the more delightful.
Well, thank you so much, Casey.
Thank
it was
you,
a
Casey.
pleasure.
This is so great. Just to remind everybody, we're accepting comments and feedback at our email at creativejpodcast at Gmail. And if you have ideas about what we can talk about on our show, please let us know. And we'll talk with you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Creative Journeys is a podcast produced at Southern Connecticut State University by faculty, students, and staff who are interested in exploring our creative potential.